same as the eye in 42 degrees.
Come in, zone 18. I'm picking up this very clear sound.
We're getting a signal from zone 18. All we know is that it's some form of music, some very clear music.
Heaven, I'm in heaven.
It's a sound, a very clear sound actually. We're picking it up everywhere now.
So we're getting signals from all over the world.
Can you tell us anything?
Bernie, I can only assure you that we're in complete control of the situation. We're continuing to analyze this global phenomenon. When we know, you'll know.
Why is DCC a little bit more superior than CD? So my reasoning comes back from my experience listening to vinyl. Everybody knows that vinyl has more rich and warm tones. The timbre is real bright and it gives you an airiness in the sound. So I discovered the same experience when I listened to a DCC. Even though it's digital, but the digitization of music represented by that is so much warmer. It's closer to a vinyl than listening to a CD.
DCC is different from other formats that I've recorded on because it's a cassette that has the sound quality of a compact disc. And it also incorporates so much artwork because you can fit a lot of paperwork into the DCC case, so I can design this as if I'm designing a vinyl.
In the 80s, I was asked to produce a business plan for digital audio tape, DAT. I came to the disappointing conclusion that DAT actually would never work for Philips.
You have to have people in the hardware industry that join the system, and that's where the problem arose, because Sony, with whom we created a compact disc system, had a clear preference.
It became clear to me while banging some walls down that you had to approach the whole problem in a completely different way, and that was where the concept of DCC was born.
A system that would be backward compatible with compact cassette. That was also very difficult because Philips, we had to do it because Philips thought not to introduce another new cartridge system.
One of the core problems that Laurent was struggling with was the difference between CD and DCC. You have to understand, CD only has one sampling frequency and DCC had to accommodate 3 different sampling frequencies for the audio. And it wasn't until I was sitting behind a desk, an antique desk at my home, working as we at that time did, trying to solve all the problems that we had, and that I realized that we needed to make a clear split between an audio subsystem and a data subsystem, where the audio was encoded in one part and the data, basically raw bits, were recorded on the tape in a separate system. That turned out to be a key decision because it led to a core patent, which eventually became part of all MP3 decoders.
Although the ear is incredibly sensitive to lots of things what we pick up in sound and in music, it is completely deaf at other places where louder sounds are masking away the capacity for human beings to hear weaker parallel sounds. Which means that in the old systems we were delivering a lot of coding room to sounds you would never hear. And if we could free that coding room to what you were really hearing, we could of course save a lot of space and get everything handled on tape. But in parallel, it turned out that we could even achieve more than the CD quality, even significantly more than the CD quality.
So we have to find out if it was possible to go to a frequency of 200 kilobits per second, which was basically the capacity we could offer. And it was a lucky shot because we found out that compression with around 200 kilohertz deliver a very good sound quality.
DCC was important for me. This was a period of massive restructuring. And we were constantly examining projects on their profitability.
We were the only company that was manufacturing machinery to manufacture DCC cassette. Personally, there was already the CD prominent in the marketplace. There was also the mini disc that had some teething troubles with the compression and how it worked. The problem for me is that I didn't quite understand personally where DCC would fill the void.
We had a problem that DAT would never see pre-recorded software. It was of no interest for the music industry. And it was very expensive and in no way near the price levels of what Compact Cassette was doing. So there I was facing the problem that DAT wouldn't work for Philips, that DAT probably wouldn't work at all. At the other hand, the music industry could be interested in supporting a recording format. The other thing which I learned during those days, because of my contacts in the music industry, was that they had a lot of detailed marketing information, specifically Polygram, the Philips daughter, now called Universal, on which kind of consumers were buying what. And what we saw is that there was a distinct kind of difference between two groups of consumers, and we for that reason called it also a dual carrier market. People buying either on disc or on cassette, on tape. And the difference were very significant. If you had a disc buyer, initially the vinyl record buyer and later the compact disc buyer, you would typically talk about somebody buying initially in his first year when he bought a new CD player or a turntable, something like 10 CDs or records. And then gradually every year it would slow down. But he would go to the music shop and he would have a keen interest in building up his own kind of musical library. Where if you look at a cassette buyer, you would see that they would probably buy only 1 or 2 cassettes per year. The fact that both markets, when they were fully developed, are equally significant is that there were so many cassette players. It's probably the most successful product we've ever launched as a consumer electronic industry, certainly at that moment. Because when we looked into the market at that time, we had around 1 billion cassette players in use in the market, which means that there were something like 5 cassette players, I think, per household worldwide in the civilized world.
At the start of such a venture, this was also the case with the compact disc, you cannot be sure of the numbers. Eh? For instance, the compact disc, we didn't do any market research. We simply believed in the product without initially being able to put numbers to it. We couldn't foresee, we believed in the product, but we couldn't foresee then that it would become a worldwide success. The same happened with DCC. You had to believe in the future of the DCC. You had to spend the money up front without being sure that you could earn it back. We were in the midst of huge restructurings of the company, but it was my belief that no company can survive with restructuring. You have to find new products. You have to find new challenges also for people. And we had the brains, we had the people who could do it, because compact disc was a major achievement. But in terms of audio compression, the demands for DCC were even higher than that. And it was quite a brilliant job of our engineers to have succeeded in doing it.
Like all the other gadgets and products we make in the industry, also music carriers follow a normal life cycle pattern. Normally products would live something like in the marketplace like 5 to 10 years, and that 10 is already long, and they would go through a phase that only a few people buy initially, and then more and more people would buy. You'll reach a maximum sales level, and then it would decline again and people lose their interest. And in the music industry, with music carriers, you will see the same phenomena, but the major difference is that it will last a full generation. Music is effectively collected by a generation. As soon as they build up their music collection, they hang on to it for the rest of their life. So we would see life cycles which would last as long as 30 or 40 years. And because they last so long, people tend to totally forget about the phenomena that you have like with every other product, a phase that it is popular and innovative and hot, that it becomes a commodity, it reaches its maximum sales levels, and then it starts to lose interest and drops down. And that happened dramatically with the long play record in the 70s. The record industry started to complain and blame the problem on all kinds of phenomena like home taping and the radio having too popular shows and not talking through and what have you. But in reality, it was nothing else that the long play record was at the end of its life cycle. And the music industry got into a very serious financial crisis because of that. CD, for that reason, in the end, when it was accepted, grew very quickly into that gap. And basically the music lover could again start to collect his favorite music on a fantastic new format. The music cassette was effectively going 10 years after the vinyl record in its life cycle, and indeed in 88, 89 we saw and expected the music cassette to go over its top and started to decline. So we warned the music industry, some of them saw it themselves, that it was wonderful that CD was growing so quickly, but if they had no replacement for the music cassette, they would again run into serious financial trouble. So there was a significant interest in the music industry to look for a replacement, and that of course could help us in a very effective way to launch the new digital cassette system, if indeed it would provide a successor for the music industry for the pre-recorded music cassette. And that's where the cooperation with the music industry was secured. So the combination of doing something to copy protection and the fact that they were indeed aware of the need to start working on the replacement made them a partner in the project.
After the demonstration with Mr. Timmer, we at Philips, we started with starting up IC design, etc. And then also we have to look for a partner in Japan. Sony was a little bit angry about not using the ARDAT system for audio, so they said no to DCC. So we went to Matsushita and we gave the same demonstration to Matsushita. And that was also successful. And also Matsushita decided to go on with DCC. And my personal thoughts are that this decision was also a little bit forced by the experience with compact disc, because in the past also compact disc was proposed to Matsushita before it was proposed to Sony, and Matsushita said no at that moment, and now they thought we don't want to miss the boat for the second time, so we go on with DCC.
At that time, the music industry, basically CBS, came with a proposal that everybody making DAT players should install a device that should detect a certain tone which they would inject into the music, and if that tone would be detected, it was a copyrighted pre-recorded CD, and then the machine should stop making a recording.
That was a theme that had come up with the compact disc as well. And we even had a big international meeting in Vancouver. I shall never forget. That was before the music industry had embraced the CD system. And that was centering on the possibility of preventing copies to be made.
Obviously, the consumer electronic industry were absolutely not prepared to go that far and make it totally impossible to copy anything.
But technically, this could be circumvented quite easily.
At that point, I came with a proposal to make an alternative system, which is later being called serial copy management system, where consumers could make a first generation copy, but the copy you would make would effectively block further copies, so that at least it could be contained, the amount of copies. We got increasingly support to indeed get a kind of an SEMS system.
I was very enthusiastic, and coming from the music industry, which was my previous job, I immediately recognized the potential. And particularly, not only was the sound much better, but I had also said, you have to modernize the presentation. The cassette has to become sexier than it was. There was no doubt in my mind that the packaging of the traditional cassette wasn't good enough, didn't express enough the upgraded, beautiful version of DCC, and this product was much more elegant, was much more sexy, and cost a little bit of money, but that was worth it. And I thought they came up with a beautiful solution. This was a little bit too simple, a little bit too, and certainly too old-fashioned. And we had learned with compact disc how important packaging was.
Mr. Timmer told that he wanted to have a nice-to-have item. So a cartridge that could cost something, but it would have a nice picture on it and a small booklet with an explanation, the same as with the compact disc.
The system had to be up and running in 1991, and that was probably the most difficult part of the project. It was a first to do what was later being explained as concurrent engineering, a kind of project where we would do research, pre-development, development and manufacturing in parallel. And it had its positive and its negatives. To give two examples, on the thin film hub operation we suffered enormous setbacks, but on the coding side, making what we in those days still called a new compression algorithm, we were far more successful than we ever had expected. So things rolled completely different from how you expect them to go from the beginning. A cornerstone of the plan was to make use of an existing thin film head plant. To begin with, the agreements with Control Data were made on a very loose basis. Might have been better to either have fixed contracts with them on what to do and when and who, or to even buy the whole operation. And the second thing was that it was not managed very effectively, because after a year we discovered that Control Data had been doing virtually nothing. So then Philips had to suddenly go into an operation of doing research on thin film heads, doing pre-development on thin film heads, and starting up and building a factory for thin film head manufacturing in parallel. Effectively, we lost 2 years and run out of the time window which was initially foreseen for the plan.
There was a general atmosphere that in some quarters that the cassette was old-fashioned and that the future lies with the disc.
The first time that I saw DCC was in 1992 on the Philips booth, and that was at the Virato in Amsterdam.
Now, the first time I saw DCC was just before it was launched. It was at a hi-fi show in Manchester, so that would have been in 92 or perhaps just at the start of 93, I'm not too sure. This was a show that was open to the public, although there was a room off to one side, which is where the DCC and the mini disc was demonstrated head-to-head effectively at the same time, because they were being launched together. I'm not sure whether I got into this room in the capacity of pretending I was a member of the press or a hi-fi retailer. I used to do a lot of things like that at the time, pretending I was something more important than I was, to get myself into events that showed things that weren't normally available to the public. But it could be that this just was an event that was available to the public. I can't quite remember. However, I was in this room, perhaps with 50 or so other people, and it was all chairs laid out, and at the front there was a person from Philips and a person from Sony demonstrating their respective products. And I seem to remember they both had a hi-fi type unit, and at the end they both showed a portable version as well, but it was mostly concentrating on the hi-fi units at the time. And Sony demonstrated the mini disc first, I believe, and went through, showed the product and got it out, put it in the player, showed how the text went on the screen, showing the titles, which, you know, was quite a nice thing at the time. Remember, CDs didn't tend to do that, and of course cassettes didn't do that either, so that was quite impressive. You skip to a certain track, jump to track 8, it'd start playing immediately, jump back to track 2, it'd, name of the title had come on the screen. It was all very nice, seemed pretty impressive. And then the Philips guy did the same thing with DCC, and he put it in, it did the same thing, titles appeared on the screen, it was all looking good until he skipped to a track. So he skips to track 8 and it doesn't do it instantly like the mini disc. There's this delay and there's this sound of a tape player fast forwarding, and it actually got a bit of a giggle in the room because everyone's sitting here waiting for this thing to get to this track that he's selected.
I saw also the Sony booth and looked at the mini disc, but the look and feel of the equipment make me decide to go for DCC.
The first player I've ever had, and the first time I heard about the Digital Compact Cassette, was with this player. This was a store model that I got at Radio Shack and local in my area.
This is what I call the Precious. I bought this at the HCC dagen in Utrecht.
I saw the superior quality of the reproduction of DCC cassettes, and I just fell in love with it because I did not know that there was a medium on tape that was digitized that was able to reproduce almost to the exact of the original.
I grew up in Eindhoven, the hometown of Philips, and I'm sure that gave me some sort of bias towards Philips products and Philips technology. I've always been a big fan of their technology, their inventions, maybe not so much of their company policies, but that certainly played a role in my being a fan of DCC.
This passion grew up from 0 to 60 in 3 months.
This is my portable. This one is quite special to me. And the reason that it's special is I used it for 4 years on my bike when I went to college. It was a 22-mile ride every day. So it's maybe 2,000 hours that I used it in all the time. And it never let me down.
I think they mentioned the prices, and they were way beyond anything I'd ever be able to afford.
Though the DCC, from what I experienced, is a superior format compared to a CD player in the reproduction of the sound, it still failed to continue its legacy throughout the years. It had a short-lived lifetime from the early 90s and died here in America in 96.
And it didn't really offer me anything I needed. I mean, I had a CD player, and I had a cassette player, and I had a cassette Walkman, and that was all I needed. I could record off the radio onto cassettes and listen to those in my Walkman. I could get cheap cassettes in the stores more often than not. The reason I bought a cassette was because it was cheaper than a compact disc. Sometimes I couldn't afford to buy the CDs. I bought a lot of import albums.
I believe that, marketing was part of the issue. CD was a booming industry. Everybody had a CD player. Everybody could do CD recording.
Actually, we should have been concentrating much more on having much earlier the cheaper models and the boomboxes in the marketplace. And we were already running a little bit in the trap that the coding quality was so dramatically good that the whole project had started to focus maybe even too much on the high-end market.
I never saw any DCC presence in the stores in the area that I lived. I used to go to work in Manchester. I used to go around the shops virtually every day just to pass a bit of time at lunchtime. Never saw any DCC equipment or DCC tapes in any stores. I even worked in Manchester's HMV store, the flagship store for Manchester.
If they'd have released that 5 years earlier, it probably would have established a great foothold in the market.
The big question is what went wrong. One thing I already mentioned, that was of course that we were running out of the time window. The whole problem with the head, and although we fixed it in 2 years, basically meant that we were losing 2 years. The second thing which we absolutely had not foreseen was the cost price of compact cassette and the further life of compact cassette. Cassette mechanism manufacturing went to one big plant which was producing cassette mechanisms 365 days per year, and that meant that, to our enormous surprise, cassettes had a cost price reduction of 30 to 50% in the marketplace. So we were suddenly facing a completely unforeseen price gap between cassette mechanisms and DCC cassette mechanisms, because cassettes started to so massively now penetrate the market that you would find them in toys for children and in literally everything. You would get them for free with all kinds of educational courses, and they were literally thrown around because they no longer cost anything. And that had an effect on the whole cassette market, dying out slower than what was expected. So if you look into retrospect what went wrong, the real competitor to the digital compact cassette was not mini disc, as some people claim, but was the compact cassette itself. We couldn't compete with compact cassette. The third thing which we had overlooked or couldn't basically know in those days is that to innovate at a time of problematic sales in the trade did happen with compact disc extremely easy. But this time we would go to the music trade at a time that they were very successful in selling compact disc with ever-growing quantities. So where we were successful in convincing the music industry to support the whole operation with digital compact cassette and releasing a lot of titles, the music trade proved to be a lot harder. There you will find people who understand the story and who want to cooperate, and they did help a little bit, but they think much more on a day-to-day basis. And if something doesn't move within a week, they start to already push whatever they have on inventory more back into the shop. So what we saw is that instead of prominently promoting DCC in all the music stores, it very quickly went into the dark corners of the shop and was ever shrunk in size, simply because they were earning a fortune out of compact disc in those days, and they didn't need it. So it's probably necessary to innovate something like that, and not when it's before the top of the market, but after, and when there's a little amount of pain in the market and need to go for such an effort.
A project that has cost a lot of money. We invested a lot of money in DCC and didn't show a quick enough upturn in sales, then you come to the conclusion that it is not worth it to continue.
Sony would have been of great help, of course, because they have a very significant marketing experience in launching innovative products.
Philips, we always said the best thing that Philips ever owned was the relationship with Sony.
They have, in that sense, a much better understanding on how slow a market can react and how long you have to hang on.
They should have asked the consumers what they wanted.
I think a great problem with the DCC in the eyes of many people who bought it or didn't buy it was that it couldn't record analog cassettes.
I think the comeback of the digital compact cassette was going to happen, just like the comeback of every audio format that we had out and we kind of love. The Digital Compact Cassette was, I knew it was going to come back, but I didn't expect it to be like this. But professionally releasing a new title on the DCC format is, I believe, what is really sparking a lot of the newer interest in this, because if you really liked the Digital Compact Cassette, you now can buy brand new titles 2017 and beyond on your favorite formats.
A lot of people miss the old formats and miss having their own media and not just downloading their songs. I think people like to have something tangible, and well, if we get a video channel like Techmoan that pays attention to DCC, I think that really helped with the revival of DCC.
When I first heard about the revival of interest, I was surprised. But also it gives me also a feeling of satisfaction that probably my initial reaction years back, that there is potential, there would be potential in DCC, came true after all. You know, it comes back to pride of ownership.
The DCCmuseum is really making the comeback of the Digital Compact Cassette exciting.
So Dr. DCC came in the picture, and he started doing his own investigation how to revive and restore all the players.
When Techmoan released his video talking about the Digital Compact Cassette in oddity formats, that probably was one of the #1 promotional reasons that explains this comeback.
Every now and again I put out a video featuring a few unusual recordings I've collected over the previous months. Well, this video is going to be the third in that series, and in this one I'll be featuring the latest release on Digital Compact Cassette. And the good thing about DCC is that perhaps it didn't last that long. So there aren't that many things to collect, there aren't that many different players, there aren't that many different tapes. So if you're interested in collecting something, it's quite a nice thing to collect. You know, it's not an infinite amount of things to buy. Say, for example, you decided, right, I'm going to start collecting compact discs. Well, you could take the rest of your life doing that. Now, they do an outstanding job with these. It's like stepping back in time to the 1990s when you take the shrink wrap off one. I know I've mentioned before how much I like DCC's packaging and how well it all fits together, but now that I've had more time to think about it, I've got to say that out of all the pre-recorded formats I've held in my hands, DCC is the most pleasing to me. It's just so well thought out.
It's a little bit sad, but the resurgence of the format is amazing. I think it's exciting. Everybody still has them. You can still find a lot of these, and the collectors are really, with the internet out the way it is, collectors are really going crazy. It's fun. It's fun to have this format because it's exciting, and now everyone can learn about what we pretty much missed out on.
So that are new DCC tapes, unbelievable. Production date 2017. How it is possible?
It is very unusual to be confronted with something in your past that I never knew would happen. So I will listen to this.
Today I like to record from Blu-ray, especially live music. Sometimes I make also mixtapes from vinyls, 12-inch for example. If I made those recordings, it's for me easy to use to do plug and play. So I can directly listen to the music in good quality.
Why collect? Well, simple enough for me. Because I really love the format. It is part of me that keeps the drive of collecting, because I discover new things from collecting DCC cassettes. And you know, I even collect artists that I don't no idea who they are.
The success of, let's call it, electronic delivery systems, like Spotify and others, is embraced very largely by the young generation. Huh? But it has the psychological disadvantage that music becomes a kind of commodity. A push of the button, there it comes. But it's not yours, it's in a computer somewhere to which you have access. And I think music is so personal that this misses out on the important point of pride of ownership. And if I see now the resurgence of vinyl and cassette and so on, I think this is because there is a part of the population who want to own something, who want to be proud of it, who want to consider it their own taste, their own collection.
It's almost like a camaraderie between me and this format, because I want for, first of all, to bring this back to life.
When I was approaching the 20th anniversary of my first album, we were going to do kind of a retrospective, definitive collection of everything I've done into one package. And I designed that around the vinyl. And I knew I wanted the vinyl, and I knew I wanted cassette, and I wanted compact disc. But I really wanted mini disc, and in playing with mini disc, I realized, for this far, let's put them on every format I can find. And DCC was an amazing journey, because we didn't know how to do this.
So these are the signals that go between DCC 175 and the computer that it's connected to with the DCC link cable. And what you see here on the screen is the bottom 3 tracks are the pass signal output from the tape. This is the pass input from the tape, and this is a clock signal. Give me some more information about how DCC tape is encoded. My wish for the community is that we can find this information and use it to do things like create pre-recorded DCCs and do other things that are impossible with the existing DCC recorders.
If I had the opportunity to give my design ideas to basically capture all those bits from the cassette itself and have a flash memory built in the player itself, so that you don't have to keep using the tape, you can save some onto a flash memory onto the machine itself.
Well, as far as machines go, I've got a total of 5. There's one that's in the hi-fi downstairs. The main one that I use, I think that's a 91. It's a narrower one, and that's the reason it's in there, because it fits in the hi-fi rack next to something else. I've got restricted space, so I was searching for that one for quite some time. It seems to be quite a rare model. However, it isn't the best one. The best one is probably this one over here, the 951, although I believe it's got the same internals as this one, which is the 730, but this one just seems to be a little bit more reliable. I've also got the DCC 175, the portable, and then I've got the 600 here at the top, which I got because the cassettes go in the drawer sideways. I just found that a little bit interesting. So these are really backup machines. I've got one main one downstairs.
As far as the amount of players I have, well, I started with the Optimus back in Radio Shack days in 96-ish. And then I would look for ones that I would just find the techniques I liked because they had interesting face features. The Philips had so many variants, which were exciting to find. Right behind me, we have the Marantz, which is the Cadillac of the line. I have a Philips up top. I loved it because it was compact, small. It was so cute. We have the Techniques because I like the face of it. Everyone had a place in my collection.
One of the reasons, of course, to help in this endeavor is that I think it was completely unfair that after the project was stopped, which was a drama for a lot of people who has worked their butts off to make this a success and really tried so hard to make this a success, that they were basically being stalked by all these people who had been standing at the sideline telling, you did completely wrong, and you could see this coming from the beginning. And you always have this crowd which themselves won't move ever, but in the aftermath will tell you what everybody has been doing wrong.
I was very disappointed when Philips stopped the DCC project in 1996. I tried to forget everything about it and felt sorry for the guys that worked on the project and all the money that has been evaporated. A year ago, Rolf asked me to be interviewed over DCC, but my first reaction was DCC is dead and buried for me. But then he told me about a group of enthusiastic fans in California who established a DCC museum. And he showed me some movies on YouTube. How could I refuse any longer? Now the time has come to revive the past. I phoned the Philips patent office and asked them if they had raised some money with the patents of PASC in DCC. And they said, yes, a lot. Then I asked, how much money you have raised? Well, I got some lawyer on the telephone and he told me, it's not our policy to share this information with certain persons. So you can imagine I was a little bit irritated and I decided to do some detective work. After 22 years, I was able to find some old colleagues that were involved in the aftermath of DCC, and I asked what has happened with the patents of DCC. And I got some information about what happened with the patents of DCC after 1996.
Over the years I've been involved in a number of court cases. Also the most notable one was a visit to the US Patent Office because one of the companies contested the fact that the patent, the core patent of the MP3 format was valid.
I was not concerned about the money when I was doing the architectural work on DCC, but now it was a time for retribution of the DCC project for all the people, including me, that worked on the project.
The core element of the patent and why it became so important for MP3 is that it describes how you can fit 3 different sampling frequencies for audio. One of which is not a very nice multiple of one of the existing normal bit rates.
DCC was a starting point of many basic patents that could be used in all kinds of audio data compression systems. So a lot of money could be raised.
And that decision to make a data subsystem and an audio coding system was key to Philips being able to play an important role in the MP3 format.
The PASC encoding of DCC was the base of the way we listen to digital audio every day today.
I think it was about $500 million. It has to be shared partly with le Centre commun d'études de télécommunication et télévision in France and das Institut für Rundfunktechnik in Germany.
And it has been haunting me ever until I stopped working for Philips.
It's a pity that this money was not enough to prevent the demise of Philips consumer electronics, but for Mr. Timmer's comfort, a lot of money could be compensated. I recently learned that Philips and the 2 partners received an Emmy Award in the year 2000 for MPEG Audio Layer 2, and that Layer 2 is a direct descendant of the PASC system of DCC.
Why is it not that well known that Philips has played an important role in the MP3 standard setting? I guess it has to do with the way we are in Brabant. We are not like the Americans that open about our achievements.
This is what innovation is. It can be successful, it has a high rate of being not successful. It has been partial successful because certain elements have been certainly in a success for Philips. And they should be absolutely, totally proud of what all of us have achieved in those days.
What would have happened if I hadn't bought my player and tapes? You see, the fact I collected them and made that video about it then has had this knock-on effect with other people, but it's also had an effect on me, because after getting quite a good number of views on that particular video, I started to concentrate more on other old formats and items that people might not have seen before, move away from the kind of videos I was doing before. That then helped the channel to grow and eventually meant that I could give up my main job and just make videos for YouTube. So it makes you wonder, if I hadn't bought the DCC player, would I still be working at my old job or not? It's just one of those sliding doors types of moments. So yeah, maybe I do owe quite a lot to DCC.
I also wish to compliment you for your perseverance, for your belief in DCC, and for spending so much time on revitalizing interest in DCC. And I'm very grateful for that. It is a living memory of my time in Philips.
But they still demonstrate the same type of enthusiasm we had in those days, listening to the music and using the devices, because it was a wonderful thing to simply have with you when you were on the move.
DCC was a wonderful project with many innovations, and after 25 years, thanks to the initiative of Rolf, it was revived, and I am now proud than ever before, and I see it as a highlight in my engineering career.
Okay, stop the recording.
Yeah.
The base encoding of DCC was base. Pask, I know.
So a substantial amount of money could be raised by because of the many
really was an amazing format. Data and the expression of crap. You can cut it.
Carly is dezelfde, dat is de hoofdrolspeelster in Homeland. Hè? Die heet ook Carly.
That's odd sounding, huh? Yeah, for a cassette. I've got to extend further, it's got to like...
A bit rate to